I was staring at the glow of the computer screen, my hands trembling so hard I thought I might smash the keyboard. Numbers filled the screen, long rows of figures that didn't belong to me, at least not legally. 6 digits, neatly stacked in an account I had never known existed. My husband's secret bank account, the one he had hidden while smiling at me every morning, while kissing me goodnight with the same lips that whispered vows of love 25 years ago. In that moment, my entire marriage collapsed into a pile of ash. I should have been devastated. I should have been destroyed, but all I felt was a cold, terrifying clarity. For months, maybe even years, I had suspected something was wrong. The late-night meetings that stretched past midnight, the unexplained receipts folded into his wallet like tiny knives waiting to stab me when I least expected it, the way he flinched when I touched his phone. But seeing that account, seeing proof that he was planning to cut me off, abandon me without a single cent, was like a slap across the face that burned deeper than fire. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the silence of the house that once echoed with laughter and promises. He was in the shower, humming that same careless tune he always did when he thought life was perfectly under his control. He didn't know that the fortress he had built around his lies had already started to crumble. He didn't know I had stumbled across the email he carelessly left open, the one that led me down the rabbit hole to the bank portal. He didn't know I had seen the lawyer's drafts, divorce papers, asset division, all meticulously planned so I would be left with nothing but debts and fading memories. I had been his wife, his partner, the woman who carried him through nights when he didn't have a dollar to his name. I had been the one who worked double shifts to pay for his education, the one who sold my jewelry so we could make the down payment on this house. I had been everything, and in return, I was nothing but a liability he wanted to erase. The thought made my stomach twist until bile rose in my throat. I remember gripping the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. My reflection stared back at me in the dark glass of the monitor, an older woman with tired eyes and wrinkles etched by sacrifice. I whispered to myself, "Is this what I gave my life for? To be discarded like trash when I'm no longer convenient?" My voice broke in the empty room, and for a second I thought I would collapse under the weight of it all. But then something shifted. The tears dried before they even reached my cheeks. My chest stopped heaving. In the stillness, another voice rose, one I hadn't heard in years, a voice sharper, colder, stronger. I pushed the chair back and stood, pacing the floor as if the truth was chasing me through every corner of the house. Betrayal. That was the word that echoed louder than my heartbeat. Betrayal not just of me, but of every sacrifice, every sleepless night. Every moment I believed in him, and yet, as much as it hurt, it also lit a fire inside me. He thought I was weak. He thought I would cry, beg, plead for scraps. He thought he could erase me with a stroke of a pen. He was wrong. The evidence was right there in front of me. The login details, the account history, the secret transactions. He hadn't just hidden money. He had been preparing for this betrayal for years, carefully siphoning funds away while smiling across the dinner table. My hands hovered over the keyboard as questions thundered inside my head. What should I do? Should I confront him? Should I scream, demand answers, throw the laptop at his smug face when he walked into the room? Or should I wait, stay silent, and watch his plan unfold just to see how far his cruelty would go? But another thought slithered into my mind, darker, more dangerous. What if I didn't confront him at all? What if I turned his own weapon against him? What if instead of letting him leave me penniless, I made sure he was the one left with nothing? The idea sent a shiver down my spine, but it was a shiver of exhilaration, not fear. I realized I was standing at the edge of a cliff. One step backward, and I would remain the broken wife, humiliated and discarded. One step forward, and I would become something else entirely. A woman who refused to die quietly, a woman who would fight back with every ounce of cunning she had left. I sat down again, this time not trembling, but steady, deliberate. My fingers glided over the trackpad as I scrolled through transaction after transaction. He had wired money to offshore accounts, disguised transfers under fake company names, even withdrawn cash in bundles I never saw. And all this time, he had looked me in the eye and told me we were struggling, that we had to tighten our belts, that my little indulgences, a haircut, a new pair of shoes, were too much. He had starved me emotionally and financially while he fattened his secret treasure chest. A bitter laugh escaped my throat, so harsh it startled me. I couldn't remember the last time I laughed like that, full of venom, full of rage. My husband was preparing to destroy me, and he thought he had already won. But the game wasn't over. Not yet. I whispered to myself, "If you think you can throw me away, you're going to learn what it feels like to be discarded." The bathroom door opened, steam spilling into the hallway. I quickly shut the laptop, my heart steady now, not frantic. He walked out with a towel around his waist, smiling like the world was his to command. "What are you doing up so late?" he asked casually, wiping water from his face. I smiled back, a smile so calm it must have unsettled him if he had been paying attention. "Just couldn't sleep," I replied. He kissed my forehead and I let him, though inside every muscle in my body screamed to push him away. He went to bed, snoring within minutes, his chest rising and falling in careless rhythm. I stood in the doorway staring at him in the dim glow of the nightlight. This man, this stranger, thought he had caged me with lies, but in truth, he had set me free. The fear was gone. The tears were gone. Only the plan remained. So I ask you, if the person you trusted most built an entire life on your sacrifices only to plan your destruction, would you crumble under the weight of betrayal? Or would you rise, take what they tried to steal, and leave them with nothing but regret? I know what I chose. And believe me, this was only the beginning. The first real crack in the illusion came on a Thursday evening, the kind of ordinary night when you expect nothing but routine. He came home late again, his tie loosened, his eyes glassy, his shirt wrinkled in a way that told me it hadn't been worn just for business. I had made dinner, the kind of dinner I used to think would keep a man grateful. Roast chicken, vegetables seasoned the way he liked them, and a bottle of red wine waiting to be opened. He barely glanced at it. He muttered something about already having eaten and went upstairs without even asking how my day was. I sat there at the table, staring at the untouched food, feeling like a ghost in my own home. Later that night, as I picked up his jacket from the couch, a folded receipt slipped out of the pocket and floated to the floor like a guilty secret desperate to be found. My hand trembled when I unfolded it. A hotel bill, 2 glasses of champagne, a charge for a deluxe suite. The date was that very afternoon. My heart clenched so hard it felt like my ribs might shatter. My husband, the man I had believed was simply busy with work, had spent the afternoon in a hotel, celebrating something or someone, while I scrubbed dishes and folded laundry like a loyal fool. I didn't confront him right away. Something inside me whispered to stay quiet, to watch, to collect. Rage screamed at me to storm into the bedroom, throw the receipt at his face and demand the truth. But another part of me, the colder part that had begun to awaken, told me that silence could be more powerful than anger. If I waited, I would see more. I would know more. And knowledge was the only weapon I had left. So I tucked the receipt into my nightstand and said nothing. The next morning, he kissed my cheek before leaving for work, and I forced myself to smile. As soon as the door shut, I collapsed against it, breathing hard, trying to steady the storm raging inside me. I remembered the younger version of myself, the woman who had trusted every word out of his mouth, who thought love meant blind loyalty. That woman was gone. What remained was someone who understood that betrayal didn't just happen in one blow. It was built piece by piece, lie by lie, until one day you looked around and realized the entire foundation of your life was rotten. I started noticing the small details then. His cologne smelled different, stronger, as if he were covering another scent. There were new shirts in his closet I hadn't bought, finer fabrics than we usually allowed ourselves. He had suddenly taken an interest in grooming, trimming his beard more carefully, whitening his teeth. He was dressing for someone, but it wasn't me. One afternoon, I found myself staring at our wedding photo, dust gathering on the frame. In it, I looked radiant, my smile wide, my eyes bright with trust. He stood beside me, young and ambitious, promising me forever. I traced the glass with my fingertip and whispered, "Where did you go? Where did we go?" The memory hit me like a blade. I had sacrificed my youth, my body, my dreams to build a life with him. And now he was polishing himself up for someone else, while I was left with sagging skin, weary eyes, and a heart full of cracks. The flashbacks came often then. I remembered working late nights at the diner to cover his tuition bills, sneaking out of bed at dawn to walk dogs just so we could pay rent. I remembered pawning my grandmother's necklace to buy him a suit for his first big interview. The suit, he said, made him look like a man destined for success. Every sacrifice, every choice had been for us. But now, staring at the evidence in my hands, I realized it had all been for him. The next sign was even harder to ignore. He started coming home with excuses that sounded rehearsed, words spoken too smoothly, like lines from a play he had performed many times before. The meeting ran late. Traffic was terrible. A client needed me. But behind the excuses was a distance I couldn't bridge. He no longer touched me, no longer asked about my day, no longer looked at me like I mattered. And when he did look at me, it was with impatience, as if I were a burden dragging behind him. One night, I couldn't resist. I waited until he fell asleep, the steady rise and fall of his chest mocking me with its peace. I reached for his phone, my hands shaking as though I were about to commit a crime. The lock screen glowed back at me. 4 digits. I tried his birthday, my birthday, the day of our wedding. None of them worked. He had changed the code. My heart sank. That was the moment I knew, without any more doubt, that I was no longer his partner. I was the enemy he was hiding from. The humiliation burned so hot I had to leave the room. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out the window into the dark night. I thought of all the times he had accused me of being careless, of forgetting things, of wasting money. It had been gaslighting all along, subtle ways to make me feel small while he carried on his double life. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and asked myself, how long has this been going on? How long have I been blind? The next day, fate gave me another piece of the puzzle. I was at the grocery store loading bags into the trunk when a woman I barely knew, a neighbor from down the street, approached me with hesitation. "I hope you don't take this the wrong way," she said softly, "but I think I saw your husband at the Regency last week. He wasn't alone." My breath caught. The Regency was the most expensive restaurant in town, a place we hadn't been to in years because he always said we couldn't afford it. "Who was he with?" I asked, my voice steady though my stomach churned. The woman shrugged uncomfortably. I didn't recognize her. Young, pretty. They looked close. She touched my arm gently, then walked away, leaving me trembling beside my car. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel so tightly my hands hurt. The humiliation was no longer private. Strangers had seen him flaunting his betrayal while I stayed home, waiting like a fool. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was careless, reckless, certain I would never find out, certain I was too blind, too loyal, too weak. That night I sat on the edge of the bed, watching him sleep. His face looked so innocent in the dim light, like the young man I had once loved. But I knew better now. I knew the man lying beside me was a stranger wearing the skin of my husband. I whispered into the darkness, words he couldn't hear. You think I don't know. You think I'm weak, but I'm watching you, and soon you'll see what I'm capable of." The first round of discovery had broken something in me, but it had also built something else. A fire, a plan, a determination I hadn't felt in decades. I was no longer simply a betrayed wife. I was a woman preparing for war. The silence between us had grown into a living thing, thick and suffocating, but I wore it like armor. Every morning I poured his coffee, placed toast on his plate, and watched him leave with the same careful smile, though inside I was cataloging every detail of his deceit. I wasn't blind anymore, and once you start looking, the lies reveal themselves everywhere. It was my friend Marissa who widened the crack that had already started splitting my marriage apart. We had known each other since high school, the kind of friendship that survives distance and silence. And when she showed up at my doorstep one Saturday morning with a hesitant look on her face, I knew something was coming. She stepped inside, her eyes darting as if she were afraid of being overheard. "I don't know how to say this," she began, "but I saw your husband last week. He wasn't alone." My chest tightened. I didn't want to ask, but the words forced themselves out. "Where?" "At a bar downtown. The Blue Lantern. He was with a woman, younger, maybe late 20s. They were sitting too close, laughing too loudly. It wasn't a business meeting." The air left my lungs in one sharp breath. The Blue Lantern. That place was known for its live jazz and dimly lit booths, the kind of romantic atmosphere we hadn't shared in years. I tried to swallow my anger, but my throat was dry as dust. "Did he see you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head. "No, I don't think so. I wasn't going to say anything, but you deserve to know." I nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Thank you, Marissa. Really." After she left, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the tiled floor as if it might open up and swallow me whole. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, scream that I knew, demand explanations he would twist into more lies. But another part, the colder, sharper part, told me to hold back. I needed more than words. I needed proof that couldn't be denied, twisted, or dismissed. So that night, I followed him. He left the house at 7, telling me he had to meet a client for dinner. He wore the navy suit I had bought him years ago, polished his shoes, and sprayed cologne that made my stomach churn with suspicion. I waited 15 minutes, then slipped into my car, my hands slick on the steering wheel, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears. I felt ridiculous, like some desperate woman in a cheap drama. But the truth was worth any humiliation. I trailed him carefully, far enough not to be noticed, close enough not to lose him. And just as Marissa had said, he drove straight to the Blue Lantern. I parked across the street, my breath fogging the windshield as I watched him step out of the car, straighten his tie, and walk inside with the confidence of a man who believed his wife was home, waiting like a fool. Minutes later, she appeared. She was young, impossibly young. Long, dark hair, a tight red dress that clung to her curves, heels that clicked against the pavement like a countdown to my breaking point. She slipped her arm through his, and together they disappeared into the bar. My vision blurred with tears, but I forced myself to keep watching. Through the wide front windows, I saw them sit in a corner booth, their heads leaning close, his hand brushing hers across the table. He laughed, a laugh I hadn't heard in years, full and unguarded. My nails dug into the leather of the steering wheel until I thought I might tear it apart. I stayed there for nearly 2 hours, frozen, watching them sip cocktails and share secrets that once belonged to me. And when they finally left, when I saw him place his hand on the small of her back, the way he used to guide me through crowded rooms, something inside me snapped, but not into pieces. No, it snapped into focus. I followed them again, my headlights off, my car crawling like a predator in the night. They drove to a sleek apartment complex on the edge of town, one I knew well because we had once looked at buying there, back when he pretended we couldn't afford it. My stomach churned as I watched them disappear inside, the door closing behind them, leaving me alone in the darkness with nothing but rage to keep me company. When I finally returned home, it was nearly midnight. The house was silent, waiting. I sat at the dining table staring at the wedding photo that still hung on the wall, the smiling faces of two people who no longer existed. I whispered to the image, "He's not coming back, and I won't be waiting." The next morning, I went through his study, something I had never dared to do before. My hands shook as I opened drawers, flipped through folders, searched for anything that could tell me how deep this betrayal went. That's when I found it. A folder marked with the name of a law firm. Inside were copies of financial documents, statements I had never seen before, and a draft of divorce papers with my name printed neatly at the top. I sat there for what felt like hours. The papers spread around me like the pieces of a puzzle I wished I could destroy. He wasn't just cheating. He was preparing to erase me. He had been moving money into accounts I never knew existed, transferring assets under shell companies, building a new life where I didn't exist at all. I pressed the pages to my chest, rocking slightly as tears finally spilled over. "After everything," I whispered into the empty room, "after everything I gave you." My mind spiraled back to the nights I had worked until my hands bled. The mornings I rose before dawn to make sure he had coffee before his long commutes. The years I had put aside my own dreams just so he could chase his. I thought of the children we never had because he said the timing was never right, because money was always tight, because we needed to wait until life was stable. All lies, all cover for the truth, that I was never part of the future he was building. That night, when he came home, I pretended to be asleep. I listened as he placed his briefcase on the floor, sighed heavily, and showered away the scent of the woman he had touched. He slid into bed beside me, his back turned, and I stared at the ceiling, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. My tears were gone. All that remained was a growing determination that one day he would pay. The next few days were a blur of gathering. Receipts, copies of statements, notes of times and places. I became a detective in my own marriage, piecing together a story of betrayal that stretched farther than I ever imagined. The more I uncovered, the less I recognized the man I had loved. And with every discovery, I felt the old me, the loyal wife, the devoted partner, die a little more. By the end of that week, I had enough evidence to destroy him. But I didn't act yet. I waited. Because patience, I realized, could be the sharpest knife of all. The air inside my house had changed. It was no longer the safe haven I had spent years creating. The walls no longer echoed with comfort, but with a coldness I couldn't warm no matter how high I turned up the thermostat. He had grown bolder, more careless, as if the very act of preparing his secret life had stripped him of even the pretense of kindness toward me. It began with small cuts, so subtle an outsider might have missed them. At dinner one night, I asked him if he wanted more salad. He looked at me with a smirk and said, "You really have nothing better to talk about, do you? Just food and the weather. No wonder I feel so bored lately." He said it casually, like it was nothing, and then went back to scrolling on his phone. My fork clattered against the plate, but I forced myself not to react. Silence had become my shield, though every word he threw sliced deeper than he knew. A few days later, he started disappearing on weekends. He'd pack a small bag and say he had business out of town, a client who needed him urgently. I knew better. I knew the bag wasn't filled with contracts and files, but with shirts he wanted her to see him in. Cologne he sprayed for her benefit, lies folded neatly between fabric and zippers. When I asked just once, where exactly this client was located, he turned on me with a glare that froze my blood. "Why do you always nag? Haven't I given you enough? Don't you trust me?" The irony nearly choked me. Trust. He had been draining my life dry while daring to demand trust. The cruelty grew louder. He began commenting on my body, the lines on my face, the gray in my hair. "You've let yourself go," he muttered one morning as I poured his coffee. "No wonder." He didn't finish the sentence, but the silence that followed was worse than words. It was an unfinished blade that left me to imagine the rest. No wonder he looked elsewhere. No wonder he found someone younger, someone who didn't carry the marks of years spent sacrificing for him. I retreated to the bathroom that morning and stared at myself in the mirror until my eyes blurred with tears. I had been proud of those lines once. They were proof of survival, of years endured. Now they felt like shackles I couldn't escape. The isolation crept in like a fog. My phone stopped ringing because I stopped calling. I didn't want friends or neighbors to hear the cracks in my voice, to sense the shame I carried like a second skin. Even Marissa, who had warned me, grew distant, perhaps afraid of the storm brewing in my life. I couldn't blame her. Who wants to stand near a house when it's already burning? He, on the other hand, seemed to flourish. He laughed more, though never with me. He dressed sharper, his suits pressed, his shoes polished. I watched him polish himself like a man preparing for an audition, rehearsing lines in the mirror, practicing smiles that no longer belonged to me. Every time he left the house, I felt my chest tighten, as though each door slam was another nail sealing me into a coffin of irrelevance. One night stands out more than the others, etched into me like a scar. He came home past midnight, smelling of expensive whiskey and a perfume that made me nauseous. I was waiting in the living room not because I wanted to confront him, but because sleep had abandoned me long ago. When he saw me sitting there, he laughed, a cruel laugh that echoed through the room. "Still awake? What, were you worried I was with someone else?" He said it as a joke, but the way his eyes glinted told me he knew exactly how much it cut. I wanted to scream, to throw the lamp at his head, to demand he stop pretending and admit the truth. Instead, I whispered, "You don't have to do this." His smile faded for a fraction of a second. And in that crack, I saw something cold, something ruthless. Then he shrugged, walked upstairs, and closed the bedroom door in my face. That was the night I cried until dawn. But it wasn't the soft tears of heartbreak. It was the kind of crying that racks your whole body, the kind that leaves you gasping, the kind that shakes loose something deep inside you. I pressed my face into the pillow to muffle the sound, but in my chest I felt something breaking free. Grief, yes, but also anger, the kind of anger that doesn't burn out, but hardens, sharpens, becomes steel. The humiliation continued. At a family dinner, surrounded by cousins and nieces, he made a joke about how I never managed money well. "If it weren't for me, she'd have blown through everything years ago," he said, raising his glass while the table laughed politely. I sat there frozen, my cheeks burning, knowing that in reality it was me who had saved us countless times, me who had worked, scrimped, pawned heirlooms, and stretched every dollar. No one defended me, not even my son-in-law, who shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The laughter rang in my ears long after we drove home in silence. The pressure grew unbearable. Bills started showing up in the mail that I had never seen before. Credit card statements, loans I hadn't known he'd taken. He snapped when I asked, shouting that I had no idea how hard he worked, how much he sacrificed, how little I appreciated him. The gaslighting was almost perfect, twisting every accusation back onto me until I doubted my own sanity. Was I truly ungrateful? Was I imagining the betrayal? Was it my fault he looked elsewhere? The questions circled like vultures tearing at my mind. I remember one afternoon vividly. I was cleaning the attic, sorting through boxes of old memories, when I found a shoebox filled with letters we had written to each other when we were young. I sat on the dusty floor, unfolding those yellowed pages, reading words that once set my heart on fire. "You're my forever," he had written. "No matter what, we'll always be us." My hands shook as I clutched those lies, tears dripping onto the paper. The man who wrote those words no longer existed. Maybe he never had. Maybe he had always been a performance, a mask I was too naive to see through. That night, he accused me of spying on him. "Why do you look at me like that?" he demanded. "You've become paranoid. Maybe you should see someone about it." His voice was smooth, patronizing, dripping with false concern. He was planting the seed of doubt, trying to frame me as unstable, unbalanced, someone who couldn't be trusted. I recognized the tactic. It was the same one abusers use to isolate their victims, to make them question their own reality. I almost laughed in his face, but I held it in. He thought he was the only one capable of deception. He had no idea how far I was willing to go now. The breaking point came one evening when he stormed into the kitchen, slammed a stack of papers on the counter, and shouted, "You're dragging me down. Do you understand that? I could have so much more if it weren't for you." The words hit harder than any slap. I stood frozen, staring at the man I had once loved, and in that moment, I realized he wasn't even trying to hide his contempt anymore. He saw me as dead weight, as an obstacle, as something to be cut away so he could live the life he thought he deserved. I stumbled upstairs after he left, my legs trembling, and collapsed onto the bed. For hours I stared at the ceiling, feeling hollow, emptied of everything except the echo of his words. I thought about all the years, all the sacrifices, all the dreams I had buried. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who believed in love, who believed in him. That girl was gone. And lying there in the darkness, I knew I had a choice. Let him finish destroying me, or rise from the ruins and destroy the illusion he had built. The humiliation, the insults, the gaslighting, the betrayal. They had done more than wound me. They had carved me into something new, something unrecognizable even to myself. And though I felt more isolated than ever, though I carried shame like a weight pressing me into the ground, I also carried something else, buried deep but burning hotter each day: resolve. The breaking point came like a storm I had sensed on the horizon, but hoped would pass. It was a Friday evening, rain streaking down the windows, the kind of night that begged for warmth and comfort. Instead, the house was thick with tension, the kind you can almost taste, metallic and bitter. He walked in late, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames, his face red with frustration. I was in the kitchen, drying the last dish, when he stormed toward me with a folder clutched in his hand. He threw the papers onto the counter, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "Do you see this?" he shouted. "These are debts. Debts you've helped create. You've been useless for years, and I'm the one left carrying everything. I can't do this anymore." His voice shook with fury, but underneath it I heard something colder: certainty. He wasn't warning me. He was announcing the verdict. I picked up the papers, my hands trembling. Credit card statements, loan applications, even a second mortgage I hadn't known existed. My name was scribbled across some of them, forged signatures that looked close enough to pass. My stomach dropped as I realized he had been planning not only to abandon me, but to leave me drowning in debt. That wasn't mine. I whispered, barely able to speak. "Why would you do this?" He laughed, bitter and cruel. "Because I can. Because you're nothing without me. You think anyone's going to believe your version of events? You're old, tired, confused. People already think you're slipping. And when the time comes, I'll make sure the court sees you as the problem. I'll take the house, the accounts, everything. You'll be left with nothing." The words echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of my skull until they carved themselves into my bones. Nothing. That was what he wanted for me. Nothing. He didn't even bother to hide it anymore. He wanted me erased, discarded, forgotten. I stood there frozen as he grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet, poured himself a glass, and walked away humming under his breath. as if destroying me was just another chore on his list. My knees gave out and I sank to the floor, clutching the papers like they might anchor me against the tide threatening to sweep me away. I don't know how long I stayed there, staring at the ink that spelled out my erasure. Minutes, maybe hours. The house was silent except for the rain beating against the glass, a cruel rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. When I finally forced myself to move, I stumbled upstairs and into the bathroom. I turned on the light and stared at my reflection. My eyes were red, my face pale, my lips trembling. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked like a ghost, hollowed out by betrayal. I pressed my palms against the sink and whispered, "Is this it? Is this how it ends?" Memories flooded me, uninvited and merciless. I saw myself at 25, holding his hand on our wedding day, believing every promise he whispered. I saw myself at 30, working double shifts to pay the mortgage while he studied for certifications that would build his career. I saw myself at 40, putting away dreams of travel and children because he insisted we couldn't afford them. Every sacrifice, every compromise, every decision that had shaped my life, it all led here, to this moment of utter annihilation. I slid down onto the cold tile, pulling my knees to my chest, and the sobs tore out of me uncontrollably. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was grief, like mourning a death. And maybe it was. The death of the man I thought I loved. The death of the life I thought we shared. The death of the woman I used to be. He came upstairs hours later, his footsteps heavy, his breath reeking of alcohol. He opened the bathroom door and looked down at me with disdain. "Pathetic," he muttered. "If you can't handle reality, maybe you should just get out of my way. I don't need you anymore." He shut the door before I could reply, leaving me in darkness once again. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to his snores rumble through the walls. My mind replayed every cruel word, every forged signature, every drop of contempt he had poured onto me. I felt small, broken, like a child abandoned in the woods. For a moment, I even thought about giving up, about letting him win, about walking away with nothing just to stop the pain. The thought scared me, but it was there, whispering in the shadows of my mind. The next morning, I went through the motions of life like a puppet. I made coffee, scrambled eggs, placed them on the table. He sat there reading the paper, his face calm, smug, as if the night before had been nothing but a rehearsal for his final act. "I'm meeting my lawyer this week," he said casually, between bites of toast. "We'll make this official soon. Don't bother fighting it. You'll lose." I nodded silently, my insides screaming, but I let him believe he had broken me. I let him think the game was over, that I was defeated, because the truth was I was too tired to fight in that moment, too hollow to resist. But deep inside, buried beneath the rubble of despair, something stirred. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a spark. Later that day, after he left for business, I wandered into his study again, searching for something, anything that might help me understand how to survive. I opened drawers, shuffled papers, and found myself staring at the wedding photo he had carelessly shoved into the back of a shelf. Dust covered the glass, the smiles inside blurred by time. I picked it up, wiped it clean, and stared at the two people frozen in joy. That girl looked so alive, so certain of her future. I whispered to her, "You didn't deserve this. You never deserved this." Tears spilled down my cheeks again, but they were different this time. They weren't the tears of despair. They were the tears of something sharper, something stronger, something I hadn't felt in years. Determination. I set the photo down and opened the laptop he had left behind. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but instinct guided me. Emails, spreadsheets, hidden folders, and then, like a gift from the universe, I saw it. An email thread with his lawyer, attachments, draft agreements, bank account numbers, offshore transfers. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. My pulse quickened as I clicked through the documents, my eyes widening with each discovery. He wasn't just planning to leave me, he was planning to erase me completely, to rewrite our history so that I had never mattered at all. But now I knew. Now I had the map. I closed the laptop slowly, my breath steady for the first time in weeks. I looked around the room, the bookshelves, the papers, the trophies he had won over the years, and realized none of it mattered. Not anymore. Because the storm he had unleashed had forced me to shed the skin of the woman who bent, who sacrificed, who tolerated. What was left was something harder, sharper, unbreakable. That night, I lay in bed beside him, staring into the dark while he slept. I could feel the weight of his betrayal pressing down on me, but I also felt the fire beginning to burn hotter. He thought I was finished. He thought I would collapse under the pressure, surrender to his lies, fade into nothing. But he was wrong. I whispered into the silence, a vow no one else could hear. "You want me to have nothing? Then I'll make sure you know exactly what nothing feels like." The morning after my breaking point, I woke to silence so deep it felt like a verdict. He'd already left the house, his side of the bed cold, the faint trace of his cologne lingering in the air like a ghost I wanted to exorcise. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like crying. Instead, I felt something harder settling in my chest, like steel being forged in fire. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring at the folder of papers he had thrown at me the night before. Every page was a weapon he thought he could use against me, forged signatures, debts in my name, proof of the trap he had laid. But now, with the fog of despair lifting, I saw them differently. They weren't weapons against me, they were evidence. His arrogance had left a trail, and I was going to follow it. I gathered the papers carefully, placed them in an envelope, and slid them into my handbag. My hands didn't shake this time. They were steady, deliberate. If he thought I would simply sit here waiting for my destruction, he had forgotten who I used to be. The next step came almost by instinct. I called Mr. Harris, an old acquaintance of my late father. He was a retired attorney, someone who had guided my father through his will years ago, and a man I remembered as sharp, discreet, and brutally honest. When he answered, his voice was warm, surprised. "It's been years," he said. "What can I do for you?" I hesitated only for a moment before the words spilled out. "I need help. My husband, he's trying to ruin me." My voice cracked on the last word, but instead of pity, I heard steel in Mr. Harris's tone. "Come to my office tomorrow morning," he said, "and bring everything." That night, I lay in bed while my husband scrolled through his phone beside me, smiling faintly at messages I knew weren't from business clients. I turned away, my face hidden in the darkness, my mind whirring with the weight of what I carried. He thought I was broken, but in truth, I was already building the first bricks of my defense. The next morning, I drove across town to Mr. Harris's office, a modest building tucked between a pharmacy and a bank. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Here, I wasn't just a victim. Here, I was someone fighting back. He greeted me with a firm handshake, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. I placed the envelope on his desk and said simply, "I think my husband is trying to leave me with nothing." For the next hour, I told him everything. The secret account, the receipts, the forged debts, the lawyer's drafts I had found. His expression darkened as he sifted through the papers. Finally, he looked up and said, "You're not crazy. You're not imagining this. What he's doing isn't just betrayal, it's fraud. And if we can document it properly, he won't just lose the game he's playing. He could face serious consequences." The words hit me like sunlight piercing through storm clouds. For weeks, I had been gaslit into believing I was paranoid, unstable, weak. But here was someone, a professional, telling me that the problem wasn't me. It was him, my husband, the man who had sworn to protect me. Mr. Harris leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. You need to start collecting everything. Every receipt, every email, every piece of communication. Make copies. Hide them somewhere safe. Don't confront him yet. Don't give him any reason to know you're preparing. You'll need the element of surprise. I nodded, my pulse quickening. It felt like being handed a weapon after months of standing defenseless. For the first time, I had a plan. When I returned home, I went straight to work. I created a secret folder on my laptop, scanned every document I had, and backed it up onto a flash drive I hid inside an old sewing kit he hadn't touched in years. I checked his desk drawers more thoroughly, finding notes scribbled with account numbers, passwords half concealed in shorthand only he would understand. I took photos of everything with my phone, storing them in a hidden folder only I could access. The more I uncovered, the more the pieces of his scheme became clear. He had been planning this for years, moving money little by little, weaving a web of lies he thought I'd never untangle. But his arrogance was his weakness. He never imagined I'd have the strength or the courage to dig. One evening, after he left for yet another client dinner, I sat at the computer and tried one of the passwords I had pieced together from his notes. My heart raced, my palms slick, as I typed in the sequence of numbers and letters. The screen blinked once, then opened. My breath caught in my throat. I was in. The account was larger than I imagined. Hundreds of thousands, maybe more, spread across sub-accounts with names I didn't recognize. Offshore transfers, hidden investments, everything meticulously arranged to keep me out. But here it was, laid bare in front of me. Proof. Hard, undeniable proof. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the glowing numbers. It wasn't just money. It was years of my life, siphoned away without my knowledge, stolen from the sacrifices I had made. And now it was in my hands. For a long time, I just sat there, the silence pressing against me like a weight. Then slowly, I smiled. Not a smile of joy, but of something darker, sharper. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I felt dangerous. I whispered to the empty room, "You think I'll have nothing, but soon you'll know what nothing feels like." The night it happened, the air felt heavier than usual, pressing down on me with the weight of inevitability. He had been restless all week, snapping at me for the smallest things, moving through the house like a man already halfway gone. I could sense it. The storm was about to break. And then, as if fate had been waiting for the perfect moment, he walked into the living room holding a manila envelope. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the sharpness of a blade about to cut. He tossed the envelope onto the coffee table, the sound hollow in the quiet room. "It's time," he said. His voice was so matter-of-fact it almost sounded kind. But the words themselves were merciless. "These are the papers. I'm done pretending. I've wasted too many years." My heart hammered in my chest, but my face remained still. I had practiced this moment in my mind 1,000 times. He thought I'd crumble, that I'd beg, that I'd fall to my knees and plead for scraps. Instead, I reached for the envelope with steady hands, pulled out the stack of divorce papers, and leafed through them slowly. Every page was a death sentence, stripping me of the house, the accounts, even the small pension I had earned from years of work. According to these papers, I would walk away with nothing. I looked up at him, and for the first time in months, I didn't see a man I loved. I saw a predator, smug and sure of himself, convinced his prey had no claws. My voice was quiet, but each word cut like glass. "So this is it. After everything. After all the years. All the sacrifices." He didn't flinch. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You'll be fine. You don't need much. You never did." The arrogance in his tone snapped something inside me. I laid the papers back on the table, leaned forward, and asked, "Do you think I'm stupid?" He blinked, thrown off for a moment by the sharpness of my tone. "What are you talking about?" I reached into the drawer of the side table, pulled out a small stack of photographs and slid them across to him. Receipts from the hotel, screenshots of his transfers, a printed email from his lawyer. His face paled as he flipped through them. For the first time in weeks, I saw his mask crack. "You've been very careful," I said softly, almost tenderly, "but not careful enough. You thought I'd never see, never suspect. You thought you could erase me and I'd just vanish. But I know everything. Every hotel, every offshore account, every lie." His jaw clenched. "You went through my things?" I laughed, the sound dry and brittle. "Your things? You mean the life I built with my hands? The money I bled for? The years I sacrificed? No, these aren't your things. They're ours. And you tried to steal them." He slammed the photos back onto the table and leaned toward me, his voice dropping to a growl. "Careful. If you think you can fight me, you'll regret it. You don't have the strength. You never did." I met his gaze, unblinking. "That's where you're wrong. I've never been stronger than I am right now. You've taken everything. My trust, my love, my future. There's nothing left for you to destroy. And when a woman has nothing left to lose, she's more dangerous than you'll ever understand." The silence stretched between us, heavy and electric. His fists tightened on the arms of his chair, his breathing ragged, but he said nothing. For the first time, he didn't look like the man in control. He looked like the one cornered. I leaned back, my voice calm, almost cold. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave these papers right where they are. You're going to walk upstairs, and you're going to sleep in the bed you've already desecrated with your lies. And in the morning, you're going to wake up and go about your day pretending nothing has changed. But know this, everything has changed. You think you've won. You think you've stripped me down to nothing. But the truth is, I've already taken back everything you tried to steal. And soon, you'll know what it feels like to be the one left with nothing." His face twisted, caught between rage and disbelief. "You wouldn't dare." I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent a chill through the room. "Watch me." For a long moment we sat in silence, two soldiers on opposite sides of a battlefield, neither willing to fire the first shot. Finally, he stood, gathered the papers, and shoved them back into the envelope. Without another word, he turned and stormed upstairs, the sound of his footsteps echoing like drum beats of retreat. I sat there in the dim light of the living room, my heart pounding, my hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. But beneath the fear was something else, power. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one cowering in the shadows of his contempt. I had stood tall, unbroken, and I had seen the flicker of fear in his eyes. As I gathered the evidence back into the drawer, I whispered to myself, this was just the first battle. The real war is still coming. And deep down, I knew I was ready. The morning of the hearing felt like walking into the mouth of a storm. My husband had finally forced his hand, filing the divorce petition with full confidence that the judge would grant him everything. He had told me with a smug smile the night before, "Tomorrow it's over. Don't even bother fighting. It'll just make you look pathetic." I said nothing then, but inside I was already rehearsing my own performance. He had no idea that the stage he built for his triumph would become the stage of his ruin. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish, the kind of scent that lingers in places where lives are dismantled and rebuilt. I walked through the metal detector with my head held high, my handbag heavier than usual because of the folder inside, my evidence, my salvation, my weapon. Across the hallway, I saw him standing with his lawyer, a slick man in a tailored suit. They looked confident, whispering and smirking as if victory were guaranteed. When his eyes met mine, he gave a small nod, the nod of a man pitying his soon-to-be ex-wife. I let him believe it. We entered the courtroom, the wooden benches filled with a scattering of spectators, neighbors, acquaintances, even Marissa. who had insisted on coming to support me. I felt their eyes on my back as I took my seat. The judge, a stern man with silver hair and a voice like gravel, called the session to order. My husband's lawyer stood first, painting a picture of a woman unfit to manage finances, a burden dragging her husband into debt. He spoke of my irrational behavior, my supposed inability to handle money, my declining mental state. Each word was a dagger designed to cut away my credibility. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, my face calm. Let them dig their hole deeper. The deeper they dug, the harder the fall would be. When it was my turn, my attorney, Mr. Harris, sharp as ever, rose and began laying the foundation. He asked the judge for permission to present evidence contradicting every claim. The judge nodded. One by one, Mr. Harris unveiled the documents I had spent weeks gathering: forged signatures, hidden bank accounts, hotel receipts, transfers to offshore funds, screenshots of emails between my husband and his lawyer discussing strategies to leave me penniless. The courtroom shifted. The smugness on my husband's face evaporated as the pile of evidence grew higher. His lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. Then Mr. Harris delivered the final blow. The account I had accessed, showing hundreds of thousands siphoned away over the years. The screen lit up with the projected numbers. Undeniable, unalterable. Gasps echoed through the room. I will never forget the look on my husband's face. His eyes widened, his jaw slackened, his hands gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. For the first time, he looked not like the predator, but like the prey. Mr. Harris turned to me. "Would you like to say something, Mrs. Collins?" My throat tightened, but I rose. My legs felt steady, my voice clear, carried by the strength of every scar he had left on me. For years, I began, I believed marriage was sacrifice. I believed love meant giving everything, even when nothing was given back. I worked, I bled, I sold pieces of myself to build a life with this man, and in return, he betrayed me. He didn't just cheat me of money, he tried to erase me, to paint me as incompetent, paranoid, unworthy of even the crumbs of the life I helped build. But today, you see the truth. The truth he never thought I'd have the courage to bring into the light. I turned to face him, my voice sharper now. You wanted me to have nothing. Now look at yourself. The only thing you have left is shame. The silence that followed was deafening. My words hung in the air like a verdict before the judge even spoke. I sat back down, my chest rising and falling with a mixture of relief and fury. The judge cleared his throat. It is the opinion of this court that Mrs. Collins is fully competent, both mentally and financially. The evidence presented demonstrates a clear pattern of deception, fraud, and bad faith on the part of Mr. Collins. The petition is denied. Furthermore, this court will be referring certain matters for criminal investigation. The gavel struck. My husband flinched as though it had landed directly on his skull. As the courtroom erupted in whispers, Marissa reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did it," she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. But I didn't feel triumphant yet. I turned to look at him one last time. His face was pale, sweat dripping down his temple, his lawyer whispering frantically in his ear. He looked at me with pure hatred, but beneath it, I saw something else, fear. That was the moment I finally breathed. That was the moment I realized the balance of power had shifted forever. He had underestimated me, dismissed me, tried to bury me, and now, in front of everyone, he was the one exposed, stripped bare, left with nothing but the ruins of his lies. As I walked out of the courtroom, the late afternoon sun blinded me for a moment. I closed my eyes, felt the warmth on my face, and let myself smile. Not the brittle smile of survival, but the real one. The smile of a woman who had taken her life back. The war was far from over, but this battle was mine, and I had won it in the most public way possible. The aftermath of the hearing spread like wildfire through every corner of my life. News travels fast in small communities, faster than betrayal can be buried. By the time I returned home that evening, it seemed as if the whole neighborhood already knew. Curtains twitched when I pulled into the driveway, and phones lit up with messages I hadn't seen in months. For the first time, I wasn't being whispered about as the fragile, confused wife who had lost her grip on reality. I was the woman who stood up in court and destroyed her husband's lies with a single folder of evidence. The first knock on my door came the next morning. It was Mrs. Dorothy Franklin from across the street, a woman who had always kept her distance, polite but reserved. She stood on my porch holding a tray of muffins, her hands trembling slightly. "I just wanted to say," she murmured, "I saw him, you know. I saw him with her. More than once. I didn't want to get involved, but I should have said something sooner." Her eyes welled with regret. I took the tray from her hands and said, "You've said it now. That's enough." And in that moment, I realized the power of witnesses. I had never truly been alone. People had seen pieces of the truth, and now, finally, they were willing to speak it aloud. Marissa became my fiercest advocate. At the cafe downtown, she told anyone who would listen how I had faced him down, how the judge had sided with me, how my husband's empire of deceit had crumbled in a single afternoon. She wasn't just gossiping. She was telling a cautionary tale, her words turning my private war into a public reckoning. Every retelling was another nail in the coffin of his reputation. Even strangers began reaching out. One afternoon, while I stood in line at the pharmacy, a younger woman touched my arm. "I was there," she said softly. "I saw the hearing. What you did, it gave me courage. My husband's been treating me like I'm crazy, too. Maybe it's time I start collecting my own evidence." Her eyes shone with the first spark of hope. I squeezed her hand, recognizing the same fire I had once been too afraid to name. The fire spread online as well. Someone had posted about the case on a local community board, details of the courtroom drama, the way my husband's lies had been exposed. Comments poured in, strangers praising my strength, women sharing their own stories of betrayal, men admitting their admiration for a woman who refused to be erased. My private war had become something larger, a rallying point for others living in silence. And then came the neighbors, who had once believed his version of events. Mr. Donnelly from 2 doors down, who had always waved politely but rarely spoke, stopped me in the driveway. "I owe you an apology," he said gruffly. "He told us you were slipping, that you couldn't handle things anymore. We believed him. But after what came out in court, well, I see now. You were never the problem. He was." His words, rough and halting, felt like a balm on wounds I hadn't realized were still bleeding. Every new voice added fuel to the flames. The truth was no longer a fragile thing I carried alone. It had become a chorus, a fire that spread through witnesses, friends, neighbors, even strangers. And with every retelling, with every nod of solidarity, I felt the shame that had weighed me down begin to lift. Of course he tried to fight back. He stormed through town with his lawyer trying to spin a new narrative, that I had manipulated the court, that I was the one who betrayed him. But the tide had turned. People had seen too much, heard too much, and the more he shouted, the more desperate he looked, the more the fire consumed him instead of me. For years. He had made me feel invisible, silenced, erased. Now the opposite was true. My story had become impossible to ignore. I wasn't just the woman he tried to destroy. I was the woman who stood up, who fought back, who refused to vanish quietly. And the world, for once, was listening. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift and merciless. My husband had always walked through town with his chin high, the kind of man who thrived on respect, on the illusion of control. Now he couldn't walk into a grocery store without whispers chasing him down the aisles. Former friends who once praised his success crossed the street to avoid him. Business partners who had once courted his favor suddenly cut ties, citing concerns about integrity. The empire he thought he had built was rotting from the inside, collapsing brick by brick under the weight of his lies exposed. The criminal investigation moved quickly. The forged documents I had uncovered weren't just evidence in my divorce. They were crimes in their own right: fraud, forgery, financial abuse. Words that once belonged to stories about other people now belonged to him. His lawyer's smug confidence vanished, replaced by frantic calls and desperate motions that did nothing to slow the inevitable. For the first time in his life, he wasn't untouchable. He was vulnerable, cornered, stripped of the shield of reputation he had worn like armor. As for me, I began to breathe again, slowly at first, like a bird testing broken wings. I walked through the house without fear of his footsteps behind me. I cooked dinner because I wanted to taste it, not because I was waiting for his approval. I opened the windows and let sunlight pour in, the same windows that had once framed my isolation, now filling my rooms with warmth. It was strange, almost disorienting, to realize that the silence I once dreaded had become a gift. People began to reach out in ways I hadn't expected. Women stopped me in the market to tell me I had inspired them. Men nodded respectfully, some with embarrassment in their eyes, as if ashamed for ever believing his version of events. My world, once so small and suffocating, had widened into something brighter. But the greatest shift was inside me. For so long, I had believed I was nothing without him, that my worth was measured by his approval, his affection, his validation. Now, standing on the other side of betrayal, I saw the truth. I was more than the sacrifices I had made, more than the scars he had left, more than the shadow he tried to trap me in. I was free, and freedom was a power he would never understand. Of course, he tried to claw his way back. He left messages, angry at first, then pleading, then furious again. He accused me of ruining his life, as if I had forged the documents, as if I had drained the accounts, as if I had humiliated him in public. But I didn't answer. I didn't even listen to the voicemails. Each one was just another brick in the wall I was building between us, a wall I had no intention of ever tearing down. The last time I saw him was outside the courthouse after another hearing. He looked smaller somehow, his suit hanging loose, his eyes bloodshot. He spat venom as I walked past, words meant to wound. "You'll die alone." I stopped, turned to him, and for the first time in years, I smiled without fear. Better alone than with you. And then I walked away, leaving him standing in his own ruin. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. The only person I needed was me. The betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but in the ashes, I had found something I never expected: myself. The aftermath wasn't just his downfall, it was my rebirth. The morning after the storm cleared, I woke to a silence that no longer felt empty. It was the silence of peace, the silence of a life finally mine again. I made coffee and drank it slowly by the kitchen window, not rushing to anticipate anyone else's needs, not listening for footsteps or bracing myself for insults disguised as casual remarks. For the first time in years, the day stretched before me like an open road, and I realized I could choose where it led. I began small. I cleaned out his study, the room where I had once found the evidence of my erasure. Each drawer emptied was like a weight lifted. Each shred of paper burned in the fireplace, another chain broken. I took down the framed certificates and photos he had left behind, not with bitterness, but with clarity. That life was gone. That man was gone. And I would no longer let his ghost live in my house. Then I turned my attention to myself. I booked an appointment at the salon, something I hadn't done in years because every dollar had once belonged to his endless emergencies. When the stylist asked what I wanted, I smiled and said, "A new start." She cut away the tired strands, colored the gray with warmth, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw not a younger woman, but a stronger one. A woman who had survived fire and come out forged. I reconnected with people I had lost. I called my sister, who had long since grown weary of my excuses about why I couldn't visit, couldn't talk, couldn't spend time on anything but him. When she answered and heard my voice steady for the first time in years, she cried. "You're back," she whispered. And she was right. I had been gone, buried under decades of sacrifice, but now I was clawing my way out into the light. I joined a community group for women who had been through betrayal and financial abuse. At first, I was hesitant, ashamed to lay my scars bare. But as I listened to their stories, so different yet so painfully similar, I felt less alone. When it was my turn, I told mine from beginning to end. The secret accounts, the forged debts, the courtroom showdown. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then one woman said softly, "You gave me hope." That was when I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who had ever been told they were worthless, anyone who had been erased by someone they loved. The house became lighter, too. I opened the windows, repainted the walls, filled the rooms with flowers I bought just because I liked them. No longer did I measure every dollar against the fear of his judgment. I planted a small garden in the backyard, the soil cool and rich in my hands, and each sprout that pushed through felt like a promise. Growth, rebirth, a future. Sometimes, late at night, the old doubts tried to creep back in. The voice that whispered, "What if you are alone forever? What if he was right?" But then I would remember the look on his face in the courtroom, the fear in his eyes when he realized I had beaten him at his own game. I would remember the strength it took to survive, the fire I had found inside myself, and I would whisper back to the darkness, "Better alone than chained, better free than loved falsely." Months passed. He faded from my life like a shadow at dawn, while I grew brighter, fuller, more alive. I traveled to places I had always said, maybe one day. I stood on the cliffs of Ireland, feeling the wind whip my hair. I walked the streets of Paris, sipping coffee without guilt, without fear. I laughed again, real laughter that came from my belly instead of forced smiles. And then came the final moment of closure. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine and thought of the woman I had been a year ago. The woman who trembled at the sight of receipts, who cried into her pillow, who believed her life was over because a man had decided she was disposable. That woman was gone. In her place sat someone who had faced betrayal, who had stood in a courtroom and spoken the truth, who had chosen dignity over destruction. I lifted my glass to the sky and whispered, "Here's to me." And so I tell you, watching, listening, if someone tried to erase you, to strip you of everything you are, would you crumble or would you rise? Would you let their lies define you, or would you fight back with the truth in your hands and fire in your heart? I know what I chose, and I hope you would choose the same, because in the end, true love cannot be bought, dignity cannot be stolen, and freedom is never too expensive. If my story touched you, if you've ever felt betrayed or silenced, tell me in the comments. Tell me what you would do. And if you believe no one deserves to be erased, not by family, not by anyone, leave a like, share this story, and subscribe. There are more voices waiting to be heard, more truths waiting to be spoken, because no one should have to learn the hard way that the most important person you ever have to fight for is yourself.